Hey guys, so finally back on this 924 turbo engine rebuild, and I got some comments on one of the previous videos, uh, one of which was very helpful. So let's take a look at what that viewer commented about. Cedric, who says he's a Porsche 924 turbo expert, been working on the cars for a long time, noticed that I had put in two gaskets on the turbo where it joins to the exhaust manifold. And I did that because that's what's in the parts diagram, is a flat triangular, just pretty much a normal exhaust gasket. And there's also one of those metal rings that Porsche likes to use on the exhaust pipes, where two pipes join together, and they're in various places. But anyway, I put both of them in this particular area, and Cedric says that you're only supposed to use one or the other, and the way you tell which one to use is there will be a groove in the mating surface. So I get to take this apart again and check that mating surface and remove one of those gaskets, because Cedric says if you have both of them in there, you will develop leaks. And this is a bad spot to have a leak after the fact, which I totally agree. I don't want to have to deal with this when this engine is back in the car. So let me figure out a way to get down in there without removing a whole lot of stuff. I think at the very least, obviously I'm going to have to remove this copper pipe, brass pipe, oil feed, and I'm going to have to loosen on these nuts that join the, I think, the hot side to the cool side or whatever, and I'm going to have to rotate that. And I think once I do that, and obviously pull the 3 bolts that join the turbo to the exhaust manifold, but I think once I do that, I should be able to fish those, one of the other gaskets out of there, and I'll shoot a video. I think it's got the groove, because I wouldn't have been able to put the metal ring in there if it didn't have the groove. So, but we'll double check that. Okay, so now you can see that metal exhaust gasket, the ring. So the manifold has like a sleeve that sticks out, and then on your turbo there's a groove cut into that flange. Now that ring sticks up minutely. I mean, if it's a 1/2 millimeter, I'd be surprised. But apparently that is all that's required to make a good seal. So that's what I'm running with. To get that freed up, I basically have to pull off that brass oil feed. There was that junction fitting, this right here, had to take that off, and then remove one of the nuts. I left one of them on this feed fitting, right? That's where the brass pipe goes into here, just enough. And then of course I had to loosen up these nuts that secure this hot side so it would turn ever so slightly. So yeah, that's what's required to fix an error that I've made. Also, Cedric mentioned that there is a torque sequence to these. I'm going to try to find that in my 924 turbo service manual. I would suspect you would want to do these 2 nuts on this plate somewhat simultaneously and then go to the back side, because there's basically 3 of these plates. He mentioned something about it cracking if you don't do them in the proper order. So let me look into that and I'll report what my findings are. Okay, guys, I did some searching on the internet and I read a couple of posts. And I learned some new terms. So this, what I've been calling the hot side, is the inducer, right? Because the hot air is going in. And then this is the exducer, and it has a turbine blade in it as well. So turbine blade here and another one inside of this housing. So regarding the cracking, I found 2 things on the internet. One was the exhaust manifold has a tendency to crack on the Series 1 cars. That would be the 79s and 80s. The manifolds have a tendency to crack. Now, if you'll remember, I found a manifold crack on this and fixed it with welds. But how you identify a Series 2 manifold is it's got these ribs on the intake runners. Also, apparently there's a difference in the mount on the Series 1 cars versus the Series 2 cars. I think the Series 1 only has 2 turbo to exhaust manifold bolts, whereas the Series 2 cars has a 3-bolt setup. And then I guess that changed again when they went from the flat gasket, 3-bolt gasket, to the metal ring somewhere in the production run of the Series 2 cars. Cedric, correct me if I'm wrong. So regarding the cracks on the inducer, I actually found a couple examples way down under the turbine blade. There, it's the bore reduces size in a couple of stages, and on the edges of the bore, that's where the cracks develop. And the only thing I could find, I couldn't find a sequence, but what was mentioned is that if these, where the inducer is mounted to this item, don't know the term there, if these are torqued down, right, when you mount it, which I don't know how you would do that, because what I found is you have to rotate it to get it in, so therefore these have to be loose. They're like they are right now. If somehow you were able to do that, when you go to tighten up the exhaust manifold and the turbo mount itself, right? Because this is a hard piece that goes to the block down in there. If the dimensions of this plate and that plate, right, because you're basically 2 mounting surfaces, if they're off by a fraction of a millimeter and these were tight, when that joker cooks up, it could potentially crack the inducer casting, is what I'm gathering. I mean, the posts are pretty few and far between. So therefore, what I've done here by loosening this would be correct. Torque these down, which 25 foot-pounds. I couldn't find a torque spec on this, but I assume it's similar. Torque that down, because that's your 2 hard surfaces that all this is mounted to. And then tighten these. So I'm going to, and I couldn't find any information about how tight these were to be tightened. I wouldn't imagine it would be any more than 25 foot-pounds, because you probably want this to have a little tiny bit of play in it for when it cooks up. However, I note that on these nuts, and I had this rebuilt, there are no locking washers, whether it be wavy washer or whatever. There's nothing. So I think it behooves me to put some Loctite on these, because this will cook up and cool down and cook up and cool down, and these will eventually loosen. So put Loctite on them in a logical order, tighten them carefully, probably a plate at a time would make sense to me. Do this plate, move to that one, because there's basically 3 plates. And the plates themselves, because I know this is true on stub axle attachments, the plate itself it acts as a washer. But I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that these could potentially come loose. So I'm put a little Loctite. I'm going to logically tighten them down, no more than 25 foot-pounds. And Cedric, please let me know if I've screwed it up again. So, and then of course I got to put this attaching line back on, and this line here, which all that is somewhat flexible. So, oh, and I found out this is unique to the Series 2 models and actually serves as an air oil separator. So maybe the oil coming out of the turbo was cavitated or whatever. And I notice it's got a line that comes from the top of it. And I would imagine, I haven't figured out where that attaches to, because it goes under the exhaust manifold and comes out here. So that's a vapor hose to remove that air from the oil. So I guess Porsche was learning new stuff all the time as they put turbos on these 2-liter Audi engines. Right, so now that we potentially have the whole turbo thing correct for now, let's go back to the top side of the engine. I had started putting components back on when we left off. I know I had this cold start, crap, I forget the terms on these. This is a cold start valve, this vacuum regulator, and this item here, all kind of joined together with all these elbows. And then I also had to find a rubber mount, because the one I was using was fractured. I think it was one of these guys here. So anyway, I moved a little bit forward after I stopped the video, and there's a fuel line, 2 fuel lines that go to the cold start valve. This one's straightforward. It runs to the fuel distributor. And this one does it well as well, but it also has a T in it right there that branches off to this guy here. Now, figuring out the routing for all that really had me stumped for about a half hour, because it has to lay underneath your throttle body, and then this bend goes over the top of the warm-up valve, or this is the warm-up valve, anyway, cold start valve. And so anyway, the hard line has to take this path here. I guess you could bend it and do something else with it, but yeah, it took me a while to figure all that out. So I've got that installed, but what I was reading about in Haynes was the whole setting on the throttle position sensor, which requires removing the throttle body. So I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to really button this up yet. I want to check that setting, which you can do on a bench is the easiest way to do it, because you got to put a meter on the prongs, the throttle position sensor. So I think now is the time to do that. Now, another thing I was missing, if I remember correctly, was a fresh gasket for where the throttle body mounts to the manifold. I think that gasket is compromised. So all that's going to kind of go hand in hand. I probably could go ahead and take the throttle body to the bench and check that setting on the TPS throttle position sensor, make sure that is correct. Actually, and also to make sure the sensor itself is functioning right. So I guess I'll do that before I mount anything else on this top side. Okay, so Haynes didn't have anything in there, not that I could find, so I'm in the Porsche service manual, and it first describes how to check the circuit going to the TPS, and then it describes how to adjust the TPS on the bench. So let's try that. Okay, so the first thing you deal with is this throttle stop. And I know I monkeyed around with that quite a bit when I was trying to get the engine to run worth of crap. And I remember reading that this stop there should be literally no contact, or very, very little. So I'm going to adjust that to where, it just touches basically the throttle, because I know I screwed around with that quite a bit. So yeah, it had about a turn extra, so I just got it where the throttle stop is just barely touching that. Now in the manual it describes putting, you can't hardly read the numbers, but that's, if you were looking at the TPS in this orientation, it'd be the last two terminals, 18 and 2, I think. If it were mounted in the car, it would be the first two terminals, because it'd be upside down, right? So now I'm going to put an ohm meter on that, and according to the manual, it should open with the throttle at 0.3 millimeter when you put a feeler gauge in that throttle stop. Otherwise, it should be a closed circuit. In other words, it should show continuity. Okay, so with showing continuity, and I pull the terminal, and no continuity. So it's functioning correctly there. And then when you open the throttle, that should, yes. Now I just need to set it, that gap. It feels like it might be a little bit large. You can actually hear an audible click on the 944s. This one doesn't click. Okay, so you loosen up on the two screws. See, this would be impossible to do that one there. With it on the engine, and then basically rotate it, because right now there's no continuity. I got the 3 millimeter feeler gauge in there, So you just want it to open. Let me just play with that, find the sweet spot, and then lock her down. All right, feeler gauge in, no continuity, feeler gauge out, continuity. It's pretty touchy. Took me a couple times. All right, so I ordered the O-ring for that throttle body. I'm trying to figure out what else I can do to keep moving forward. I did find the seal. This seal for the turbo output. This is where it goes out and into the snorkel that goes into the throttle body. And I know this seal was completely missing. Always had been, and that was a big problem. So it was a huge air intake leak. And because I know I fiddled around with it and I could tell it was leaking. But anyway, so this bracket here, let me grab that part and show you how it fits on there. So yeah, that guy there simply fits on top of that. And like I said, the snorkel joins on there, and there's a gasket there, flat gasket. So I'm going to lube up that O-ring and find the bolt. Looks like 8mm, and get it on that bracket, because I know getting to that bolt with the engine in the car is virtually impossible. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted. Okay, so to get that to line up, I had to loosen the two bracket mounting bolts in order to make this portion of the snorkel line up here. But you know, I got everything tightened back down. It definitely requires a ratcheting box end, 13mm. So now I know why I was never able to replace that seal, because I couldn't access this with the engine in the car. Just the more and more I work on this engine, the more I realize that Porsche was really kind of cobbling things together. I mean, there's a Series 1 and this is the Series 2, but I don't know that there was a huge amount of improvement. I've never worked on a Series 1, but wow. I think this is going to be the end of this video. Next time I should have that O-ring and get that throttle body back on and see what else I can get on the top end. Maybe the engine harness. I did look and see the injectors are available. I did a lot of work on the ones that came with the car. I got them where they were flowing okay, but you know, they're like 70 bucks each. So I think it'd be kind of crazy not to put new injectors on it if they're available. So that's where I'm at right now. Thanks for watching.